I'll build on, won't repeat what Will and Richard have said. I agree entirely that how valuable this is, how important, and how under-resourced. And I agree with Richard's bleak assessment. I want to start with the good news. I do have, in about the 20 years I was on and chaired the historical review panel overseeing CIA declassification, that I found two very heartening things. One, the people doing the bulk of the work are annuitants, retired. And we worried when we were first told that, we thought, foxes and chicken houses and all that. That was wrong. By and large, overwhelmingly, they want to get the story out. And they had good judgment. And related, and the second point is, we did not find any big cases of CIA refusing to release things because they were embarrassing to the U.S. government. They didn't care about that. Or even embarrassing to CIA with one detail. So that's the good news. Now let me take 5 minutes of bad news. The details of what had happened to the HRP you have, I've sent around and you can read. I'm guardedly optimistic.
Please do not use acronyms.
Oh, the historical review panel, that I chaired, that was the only outside group. We had full clearances, but I don't want to say supervised, but we saw what they were doing and we saw what they were redacting, and we were able to go directly to the director and say, hey, this is pretty good. No, this is where you're screwing up. And now we're on hiatus. I'm guardedly optimistic that it will be restored, but with a significant time gap. Okay, what have we learned in this? I want to do a few things in CIA and then building on Richard, the general thing. One thing we've learned at CIA is that people at the middle levels really do matter, in a way perhaps more than the very top because they're not paying enormous attention. The middle level people, we had some that were very dedicated to declassification and others, I fear now, much less so, on really bureaucratic and personal grounds, but it made more of a difference than I might have thought. One particular problem and then a bottleneck. The problem is, as I mentioned in one paragraph that Bill Burr picked up on, and I hope others do, that CIA had a very robust 25-year review program, produced millions of documents for the archives, many of which, of course, are direct because that's how you can release them, but really quite good stuff, and used a lot in academic research. That program has essentially been ended, and I think for budget reasons, but because we have not met for the past year, I can't tell you for sure. It looked to me as though the budget did drive that. And just to underline what Richard said, at least as we're doing it now, and I'll come back to it, it's very personnel and very dollar sensitive. You got to put dollars in to get documents out. And I think that's the reason for this, but the effect is very bad and not noticed in the community yet, but I hope it will. That's why I wrote that paragraph that will be published in this newsletter for the historians. Another bottleneck CIA could do much more about is that if things are publicly known, that isn't enough to declassify, because they say, partly correctly, there's a difference abroad in whether something's known or whether it's publicly acknowledged. And so in principle that's right, but I think CIA partly just because they get so pissed off when stuff is released but not declassified and leaked, that they don't, they just say, oh, well, it'll hurt more if it's publicly acknowledged without really demonstrating or thinking, is it really going to be so bad? Everyone knows it. Are the foreign governments and foreign liaison services really going to notice that something they've known about is now in Frus or on an archive? I doubt it. And, you could get a fair amount out by ignoring that. Okay, now where we are and the problems in general. That Richard mentioned, one reason it's getting worse is the electronics. That about 25 years ago, electronic communication started coming in. And the volume of documents, at least at CIA, I assume it's the same in the other agencies, goes up literally by an order of magnitude. I mean literally. We use this as a garden variety phrase, meaning it's get bigger. No, literally goes up 10 times. So even if you could throw more money at it, you cannot do it. The only way to do it is with, some sort of machine learning, AI, programs. They cannot do the job completely, but you need to get these systems so it can literally do 90% of the job. So then you've got 10% in. CIA, I believe, took the lead in trying to develop this. The other agencies, we were told, and I think probably correctly, did not contribute but wanted to tag along. I'm not at all convinced the program, the way CIA did it, was going to work. And when we in my committee said, why don't you talk to people at Apple and Google who happen to have resources much greater than yours and might be able to help you, we were told to take a hike. So I'm not convinced, even though CIA was smart enough to see it was a problem. And maybe in the past year, one guy said, we've made great progress. Well, right, you've heard those in briefings. So I'm skeptical. But this is literally the only way we can do it. And I fear we're just not anywhere. And that then, as Richard says, it's produced the breakdown of FOIA and MDR. In fact, MDR, Mandatory Declassification Review, was designed only for a tiny throughput. The clog in FOIA has led any smart researcher and journalist to do both routes at once, which makes individual sense, but is collectively disastrous. FOIA, furthermore, is screwed up, thanks to Congress, because the agencies can't prioritize, and there are nuisance requesters, people who put in requests not even for UFOs, that's fine, but for just bizarre things that take enormous work and they're totally meaningless. And yet, it's in the queue, you have to take it. So, and I'll come back to Congress toward the end, this system, as it's now designed, cannot work. And the point by John Powers, his 4 bullet points are absolutely, I think, spot on. We as a community have to be willing to accept more risk. You can't, you gotta say, yes, we are going to let more out, and there are going to be some things we're going to regret. I hope not names. We were talking about this over dinner. Things that may do some damage. But if you're, the more you go to zero risk, the more you go to zero output. And it takes a really high-level decision to say, no, this is important enough to increase the risk, not to the top, but a little more. That would go a long way. A couple of other problems. As Richard mentions, the presidential libraries, which are absolutely crucial. That's where, all our students go. Where is now, partly because of technical breakdowns, literally in the computers, they can't do what they used to do. And I heard some of this on the documents being referred back. I gather it's now even worse than that. And we have to recognize the presidential libraries are a major national resource and have to be treated this way. And otherwise, we are, again, going to grind to a halt. NERA, again, very underfunded. I got it getting a little better, but there's still added bottlenecks there. Finally, I could be glad to go into detail on a lot of this, but maybe we can in discussion. What's the answer? Well, years ago I was talking to a reporter. In our conversation, we came up with, there are only two things: ridicule and Congress. That is, public ridicule for the ridiculous things that are withheld. Now, sometimes you get ridicule unfairly. CIA was ridiculed for holding back some of the secrets about invisible writing that were 75 years old. They were actually used in communicating with prisoners in North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So there's some things that you can ridicule that you shouldn't, but it's still a target-rich environment. And, that helps. But Congress, I think, is absolutely essential because, first, the FOIA statute in a well-run world, no, that's not our world, could be changed to give more discretion. Of course, it's a vicious circle. That stuff isn't getting declassified, so the answer is, oh, well, we'll put on more rigid rules. We can't give these people discretion because they're not letting stuff out. If we could get ourselves to a position where both more resources and some degree of trust that allowed the nuisance applicants to get to the back of the line, you could do much better. If we could get a system that accepted more risk, and partly the Hipsy and Sissy saying, we understand that, but it's worth it. I mean, don't go hog wild, but it isn't as though if you make the one mistake you're going to get crucified. That would make enormous help. If there were a real push from both Congress and the executive to work on the AI and various systems, that would help. Without that, I fear, as Richard says, it's going to get worse and worse. And as Will is right, it's not just our graduate students who are going to suffer. And I could go through all those reasons, but they've said it better than I. So I think the news is not good, and it take major effort to turn things around. Thank you.